I'm so excited to be here. I'm going to read out of Thessalonians. So if you'll open up your books, your Bibles to 1 Thessalonians chapter 3. I'm going to read verses 3 through 10. Therefore, when we could no longer endure it, we thought it good to be left in Athens alone. And we sent Timothy, our brother and minister of God, and our fellow laborer in the gospel of Christ, to establish you and encourage you concerning your faith, so that no one should be shaken by these afflictions. For you yourselves know that we are appointed to this. For in fact we told you before when we were with you that we would suffer tribulation, just as it happened. And you know, for this reason, when I could no longer endure it, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter had tempted you and our labor might be in vain. But now that Timothy has come to us from you and brought us good news of your faith and your love, and that you always have good remembrance of us, greatly desire to see us as we also to see you. Therefore, brethren, in all our affliction and distress, we were comforted concerning you by your faith. For now we live, if you stand fast in the Lord. For what thanks can we render to God for you, for all the joy with which we rejoice for your sake before our God, night and day, praying exceedingly, that we may see your face and perfect what is lacking in your faith. And the Lord bless his word. You know, this process started a long time ago. It was a very interesting process for my wife and I as we went through this to become part of this church and this community. And I'm going to be very upfront with you. I've been very anxious over the last few days and weeks as we are preparing to come, since you sent the call to me and I accepted. And so even though this church has been going for a long time, and for the past 5 years or so, you've struggled with having a pastor. Yet God has preserved you, protected you, and through the strength that you have in this church, you have been successful. Yet it still was nervous for me, waiting to be here. So I spent my time working on my home there in Texas, packing up, visiting with friends to keep my mind busy. But you know, life is not fair. Have you heard that said to you? Have you ever said it yourself? I know that probably all of you have said it to your children. Life is not fair. It's not. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, about why life is not fair. That this is the thing that we know this to be true. It's not fun, but it is true. So how do we deal with it? This next slide, it shows a little map of where Paul was ministering. Now, if you look up at the very top where it says Philippi, basically the first place that he had landed after he came over from Macedonia, which is that large body of land to the right. And then eventually, he was kicked out of there and went to Thessalonica, and then kicked out of there and went to Berea, and then kicked out of there, and eventually he's made himself down all the way down to Athens. And then he went over to Corinth, which you see in the very bottom there. Now, as I stated earlier, Paul was probably in a state of shock, wondering why God had sent him to Macedonia. Remember when I spoke here a month ago, I mentioned that, Paul probably had some own thinking in his own mind, like, God, did you really send me here? I've not been successful. I've been kicked out of 3 places. They're small little churches, and I'm really wondering if this is what you have for me. And the other thing is that he really didn't know for sure how those churches were doing, which is one of the reasons why he sent Timothy to go check on them. But my question is, why Timothy of all? Timothy was just a young man. He had found him in what we call today Turkey. So he was there in Turkey, and that's where he found him. He was his mom and his grandma. He lived there with. I'm sorry about that. I'm having troubles with this. My ear's not big enough, I guess. And he was this young man that Paul was mentoring. And so he's now down here in Corinth. Actually, he sent him when he was in Athens and sent Timothy back to go check on the people in Thessalonica. The only thing I can think of, because there's nowhere mentioned on why Timothy was sent, is there's a couple reasons. One is Timothy was not a full Jew. So he probably looked more like the people in that area. He wouldn't have been suspect immediately to say, okay, well, these guys are Jews, they're rabble-rousers, let's get them out of here. The other thing is Timothy was just a young man, so maybe maybe he wasn't intimidating. And so people, sometimes that's why when we think about children and the impact that they can have in the community, we think, oh, they're just little kids, what can they do? Well, Timothy was probably late teens, early 20s, and we're thinking, what can he do? What kind of influence does he have? Again, Paul had enough confidence in him that he sent him there to take care of them. Now, that distance there is about 330 miles. Now, Angel and I, over the last week, have driven 4,300 miles. So we know what being on the road is like. I'm glad I'm not a trucker. I feel bad for Pastor Leroy, why he ever did that. But in that time, it would take 14 to 17 days to travel. And so Timothy took that time, and so it took him a couple weeks to get there, spend some time with them, and then, again, the same amount of time to return. So that was quite a bit of distance, and again, walking was probably the best mode of transportation they had. Life is not fair, but God provides people. As I mentioned in the children's message with the kids, that sometimes it's important to have people that come along. I have an interesting story to go along with that. There's this guy, and he hears about this impending storm that's coming. It's a big old rain, and he knows it's going to be a really bad situation. His place has been flooded in the past. And so he's there, and it's raining, and he's having a hard time getting around. He's in a wheelchair. And somebody comes by in a car and says, hey, the rains are coming, the flood's coming. Can I take you somewhere? I said, oh, no. The Lord's told me he's going to take care of me. So the rain gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And then a guy in a boat comes by and says, hey, I've got a boat here. I can take you. Come along with me, and I'll take you in my boat. And the guy goes, no. Lord's got me. He's got me taken care of. He's promised he'll take care of me. Finally, he somehow gets himself up onto the roof, and there's a helicopter comes by. And the guy's going down, hey, I'm here to help you. And he goes, no, don't worry about it. The Lord's got me taken care of. He said he's going to take care of me. Well, the waters went up, he drowns, goes to heaven, and he goes before the Lord and he says, Lord, I thought you said you were going to take care of me. And he goes, I sent the guy in a car, a boat, and a helicopter. What more do you want me to do? You see, God provides people. He sends people that will help us. As you see here, Timothy was sent there to bring encouragement to them. Paul was somewhat afraid of what was going to happen to these people because he told them that they were going to have affliction. And he's mentioned there in 4 different times about sending Timothy to take care of them. But Paul is also anxious to hear about them for himself. He wanted to see if what he was doing was making an effective work. As pastors, sometimes we do have those concerns. We want to know that what we say and the things that we do have an effect on people's lives. And that was Paul. He was concerned. Have I really done what I need to do? Have I really been obedient to God to serve these people, to care for them, to encourage them? He wanted to make sure. This is a brand new church. It's mentioned there 4 times again. It's a brand new church. He's concerned about them. And the words that are used are words, and in fact, Charles brought this up a couple weeks ago. Paul constantly uses these words of great affection and endearment. He uses words that have the idea of a mother caring for their child. And so Paul has a great love for this church. And so when the good tidings comes to him and tells him that everything's great. What's interesting about this word good tidings there, the word good tidings is the same word on the gospel or the good news. It's always used only for salvation, except this one time. It's as if in their minds, the gospel has been recreated. Their salvation moment has been recreated in the mind of Paul when he hears the news from Timothy. It's like it had happened all over again. Think about when you go through your memory books. And you go through old photo albums. It's like you were there and you remember those great times. And Paul was having that same moment right then and there. that Timothy was bringing this great news. Think about what, as a parent, we want to be there when our children are walking. We want to see them do it. Not just to see them accomplish it, but for us to say, my kid's walking. And if we're not there that first time that they walk for the first time in front of grandma or grandpa, we're like, well, I didn't get to see him walk for the first time. It's like we're not going to ever see him walk again. But the point is that this is the same way that Paul has this affection as a parent. He wants to be there with them. But life is not fair, yet God appoints it. Paul had prepared them for hardship. He knew it was going to happen. In that time, it was almost expected to die for the faith. It was almost part of the Christian life. Especially in this time, in just a few short years. This was written around 40, 41, 42. In just a few short years, in about 10, 15 years, one of the greatest trials for the church was going to happen under the person of Nero. And so Paul was preparing them. He told them that this was going to happen, and it is appointed. In verse 3, it says that no one should be shaken by these afflictions, for you yourselves know that we are appointed to this. Isn't that comforting to know that you've been appointed for suffering? Not so fun, is it? This is what is expected. The world doesn't like you. They don't like the fact that you follow the Lord. Back in those days, if you changed philosophies or faiths, it usually didn't make much of a difference in your life. You still went to the temples that they had there, and you still purchased all the stuff, and your lifestyle didn't change much. But all of a sudden, there's this faith about this Jewish carpenter from a land far away, and when people came to Christ, their lives changed. They no longer purchased the idols. They no longer went to the temples. They no longer gave allegiance to the emperor. Life had changed. And so they were now a source of ridicule, and they were attacked by the people there. It used to be when we were growing up, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and my wife grew up in the Methodist Church. It used to be that everybody went to church, and it was, everybody had pretty much a common belief system. It's not so much that way anymore. Our country is slowly moving away from a faith in God. And they're going to become more antagonistic towards us, His church. Now, we may think in Wishick, we're protected from all that. We're a small little town in North Dakota. Who cares about us? Well, there's a thing called the internet. There's Facebook, there's social media. There are things now that we would never have expected 20, 30, 40 years ago. And the world does not like us. It says here very clearly in the Word that there is a tempter, that he's trying to tempt us, he's trying to draw us away. And all it takes is just a few seconds on this little device right here to tempt us and to draw us away. And Paul was concerned. And so when he says in verse 8, let me read that to you again. It says in verse 8, it says, "For now we live if you stand fast in the Lord." The wording there is almost as if you've taken a deep breath. Everything's okay now. I've heard about your faith. You're doing great. I'm so excited that you are doing well. It's almost, have you ever heard where the kid says, if I don't get what I want, I'm going to hold my breath. And it's like, okay, hold your breath, because in a few seconds you're going to pass out and start breathing again anyways. That's the same wording that's used here. To the point where he's holding his breath, waiting for this report from Timothy, as almost as if, I just can't wait. And he's holding his breath. And finally when Timothy comes and tells him the good news that they're doing great, Paul takes this deep breath. It's okay. They're doing all right. I don't have to worry about them. Life is not fair, and we know it, don't we? We can't have a life without pain, a life without trouble. We've lost a couple of people over the last couple of weeks. Although they may be with the Lord right now, still there's a pain for us. When Jesus, one of his best friends, passed away and died. And he knew within a few minutes he was going to be raising him from the dead. The Bible still says that he wept for the loss of his friend. Life is not fair. It has pain. To the point where Paul was sent away. Now, what's interesting is, here's Paul, he's down in, as I showed you in the map, he's down there in Athens, 2 weeks away. And he sends Timothy back to take care of them. Now, Paul is like me, he's an extrovert. And I told Angel, and I've told many people this, I says, if you want to send me to hell, just leave me alone. I hate being alone. That's why I've always loved working with teens. That's why I've always loved being involved in the church, because I love working with people and discipling people. But if you want to just put me into the worst place in the world, put me in a place by myself. And that's how Paul was. I mean, he was hurting so bad. He was alone. Everyone was gone. They were going to check up on this church. But he knew that was the right thing to do because he wanted to make sure that the church was okay. He was willing to endure that even for himself. And in verses 3 through 5, he talks about the faith that they must have and the troubles that they're going through. And he talks about their faith, not faith as in belief, but rather faithfulness, that they will live it out. Because that's what Christianity is all about. It's not just about believing something. It's about actually doing it, living it out day by day. And Paul heard that. That's why he called it a labor of love in the first chapter. And then he says that he's going to pray for them in verses 10 through 13, which we're not going to cover. We'll cover that next week. But Paul's desire for the Thessalonians is one of love and one of holiness, which we'll talk more about later. Now here's the hard part. Life is not fair, but somehow God uses it to perfect us, to grow us up. You're thinking, Lord, I have better ways in which I can grow up and mature. You don't need to bring struggle in my life. I can do it probably, I could do it with $1 million and, I can grow and mature. And he said, no, I have a different way for you. And you're thinking, really? Do I have to do it this way? But this is God's way, and he does it. And that's why for us it's important that we are the ones who will disciple people, that will raise them up in the Lord, to train up people to avoid temptation, especially in this day. That's why it's so important for us older folks to speak into the lives of our young people, because there's going to be temptations that come in their life that, some of us did not face. When we were kids, we didn't have this device. We got on the phone and, would ring like this. Maybe some of us even had the old like this and party line, hey, I need you to get off the phone so I can get talking. Kids, there was a time that everyone was on the same line. So if someone was talking, you had to. So if you wanted to hear what was going on in town, you just lift up the phone and someone was probably talking on the phone. But nowadays, everything is right here. And there's so much temptation through this. And so it's therefore up to us, the older folks, to teach our younger ones. Paul was really concerned about this church. And I was too. I was longing to get here. The thing is, I know that you don't really need me to lead and to grow in faith. But it's so much better when we do it together. It's so much more enjoyable when we get to work together. And that's what Paul was missing. That's what Paul wanted to know. What's interesting is the Thessalonians' response back to Paul. And remember, in that day, Paul, there was people that were out there philosophizing all the time, trying to get converts over to their way. When the Thessalonians heard that Paul continued to minister in every town he went to, they realized that Paul was the real deal. And because of that, they loved Paul all the more. He wasn't just some guy that, for a short time was there and kind of, gave them this philosophy to follow, but rather he had proved himself in his further work. So for Paul to hear that back from them, he was also encouraged by what they said to him. And so Paul came away encouraged, not just that he went there to send Timothy to encourage them, but there's a very interesting thing that was said here. And at first you would think, oh, he's doubting them. Let's read what it says. In verse 10 it says, night and day praying exceedingly that we may see your face and perfect what is lacking in your faith. In other words, he's trying to say to them, you guys don't know enough and you need me to teach you. That's not the intent at all. The idea is that together we're going to perfect the faith together. Now you can imagine he'd been there for about a month and a half, maybe 2 months. How much Bible teaching could he have done in that short amount of time? Probably not a whole lot. And so obviously there's more to be taught. And he does actually, later in this book, in the next couple chapters, he does talk about some end time stuff. They had some questions about the end times. Hey, if my relative dies before a certain time, and before Christ comes, what's going to happen to them? So there's some questions, the answers in this letter. But there was way more. And the same is true here. There's way more that all of us can learn from each other. I was a kindergarten first grade teacher back in the 90s. And I learned more about teaching from the children than I ever did from college. I'm just saying. They taught me, I'll never forget this one time, I learned to make sure that my breath was okay from kids. Because they're honest, right? So I'm teaching, and this one little boy is sitting there, and I'm walking around there doing all their seat work, and I come up behind him, and I'm talking to him, and he looks up to me and he goes, teacher, your breath stinks. I'm like, wow, well, thank you very much. I'll take care of that right now. So I don't know, I found a piece of gum or a mint or something, I don't know. But from that point on, I realized kids are offended by bad breath. And if it keeps them from doing their work, then, that was a big lesson for me. I was in my 30s. I should have known that by then, right? But apparently not. I needed a 5-year-old to teach me. But that's the perfecting of our faith. You're going to teach me. And I'm going to teach you. We're going to learn together. We're going to walk this walk of faith together. And this community is going to be impacted by what happens through this church. And we're going to have fun along the way. We're going to enjoy this walk together. You don't need me to perfect your faith. But we need each other to perfect our faith. So, what is the truth here? How does God encourage his church? Go ahead. First of all, he uses people. Remember I told you about this, kids. He uses people. God is in control, and he chooses to work through the efforts of men. Now, God could have had a giant airplane with a banner that says, I died for you, come to me, and have it circling around the world, and that could be his witness. But he chose not to do that. He chose to use people. As flawed as we are, he chose to use us. Instead of living in our me generation that we have today, I know there's a lot of people who complain about the millennials and all that sort of stuff, but the reality is, this is our world. How is God going to use us? He needs to use people. But he also talks about he doesn't do our prayers. It's not advancing. Need to freeze up. Oh, there it goes. And then, lastly, he perfects us through the times that are tough. Paul's prayer in verses 9 and 10 contains 3 things. He talks about a maturing faith, the love that it may abound, and a holiness of life. But he implies that it's already happening, and all he's doing is acting as a cheerleader. I'm going to close the message with how God uses things like this to impact people's lives. And you never know it. sometimes. Working in the school, one of the things I had the great pleasure of doing was coaching. I love to coach. I've coached golf, baseball, basketball, volleyball. Well, I just happened to be coaching the volleyball, the girls' volleyball team. We were a very small community. The school had 42 students in the high school. So it was a very tiny school. We just so happened to have, though, that year we had enough girls that wanted to play volleyball that we could form a varsity team and a junior varsity team, which was unheard of. The unfortunate thing is, these 8th graders that were now 9th graders had never played volleyball, ever. So you can imagine our first game and our second game. We didn't win a game the entire year. But the way schedules are set up, and I don't know how it's set up in here, but the team that you played first of the year, you play at the very end of the year. There was only like 6 or 8 teams in our whole section there. And so we played the team called, was it Quincy or Portola, I think it was. And they're like the best team. They had 600 students in their school, and our varsity team played okay against them, but our junior varsity, they smeared us. I mean, I think it was like 15-1 or some ridiculous score like that. And we were horrible. But we kept working and kept encouraging and kept encouraging. We get back to the last game of the season. We're playing Portola again there in Portola. And the girls are playing their best and they're playing hard. And guess what? We still lose. But they played very well. It wasn't 15-1, it might have been 15-9 or something like that. But what was interesting is at the very end of the game, as the girls would gather around and I was encouraging them and saying, hey, you guys, look what you guys did. This is the best team, undefeated team in the league, and you nearly beat them. And I had this person who had been watching me at the first game and this last game. It was one of the parents of the other girls. And she comes up to me and she goes, I've watched you. And I love what you do with those girls. First of all, I saw their skills improve. But most importantly, you know what I saw? That you believed in them and you encouraged them from the first game until this game. And I can tell that you're a good coach because you care for those kids. Now, I don't know if any of those kids, Angel, will ever remember us from back then. That was 25 years ago. Maybe the impact I made on that lady was something that will last for a long time. And so this week, when you see someone who's not so good, who's discouraged, remember you're the person that can help them. Number 2 is you can pray for them. And number 3 is you can help perfect their faith by encouraging them and talking to them and learning from them. Father, we just thank you so much for this time together. We are so grateful. So very grateful to you. You have put this church together with the right people, the right timing, so that you be glorified. Thank you for encouraging your church and using us to do it. We want to give you the glory. We want to give you the praise. We look forward to how you're going to continue to use us in the times to come.